So, I'm Dr. Jennifer Jackson. I'm a registered nurse, and this is a short video talking about memos and reflexivity in qualitative research. So, as qualitative researchers, we haven't always been really good at explaining some of the things that we use all the time. So, memos and reflexivity are one of them. All the research books will say you have to write memos, you have to engage with reflexivity, but like, what does that actually mean? What am I supposed to do? And I felt like when I started research that I had to just like write my stream of consciousness and try and figure out how every facet of me was influencing the process. And I found that that's not actually the case. So people can have different views about what is a memo. Is a memo something you write at any point that forms part of the data? Is it something that is complementary to your data? Um, is it something that's part of the analysis only throughout the research process, all these kinds of things. So there's different nuances to this depending on what kind of study you're doing, what sort of methodology, what your supervisor wants, any of those things. In general, I say the purpose of a memo is to document things that were notable, influential, important to remember as you're going through and doing analysis. So that can be while you're doing analysis, but it can also be something that happens during data collection. So I generally think of memos as something that is useful during data collection and data analysis. Reflexivity is contested, but generally I understand it as it's the umbrella idea of being aware of yourself, being self-reflective as you do research. And so you want to reflect on what about you is influencing your research process. So I bring all the pieces of my identity to research, but I can specifically think of I've had participants that have said, we don't want any more woke crap in our institutions, or, we're hiring people because they're like specific hires for a characteristic like gender or race. They're not actually qualified. So as a person who is from an equity seeking group, that really gets the hair on the back of my neck standing up. And I get prickly about it when, like, oh, we don't need that feminist crap or whatever. And I'm like, excuse me? But that is not therapeutic in an interview to bring up. So generally say, okay, tell me more about that. What I would write in the reflexivity part of my paper or in a memo is to say, this participant's views were very different from mine. So it's my views on feminism or my views on equity that are affecting how I engage with this. Because I didn't want to ask this person questions, or they were practicing in a way that I found really upsetting. Like saying, you know what, I'm never prescribing opioids again, and they're addictive, and I'm not going to treat pain anymore. And I'd say, yeah, but that's actually really nuanced. Like, we need to think about opioid stewardship and all, but you're not going to get into that debate in the middle of an interview. So, what you need to be reflexive about is when your views or your identity are coloring how you feel about what you're finding. Another time you need reflexivity is if you are making assumptions about things. So if somebody says, oh, well, I had XYZ happen, and you're like, oh, yeah, I know exactly what that is. That's a case where you need to use reflexivity to say, hey, I know what that is in my ICU. Do I know what that is in this participant's ICU or in this participant's practice setting? I mean, I've heard this slang before, but do they mean the same thing as I do? And so I think the places I find reflexivity is most important is not making those assumptions and really making sure that you're understanding the participant experiences, not trying to fill in the gaps with your experience. or when your views or parts of your identity or yourself are starkly contrasting with that of your participants, and you need to try and not let your views overtake the research or derail the questions and things you're asking. So it doesn't mean that you pretend you have no views, and it doesn't mean that you don't, you don't reflect critically on it later. Like, you don't have to not be who you are, but you need to take into account how am I, researcher as instrument, affecting the analysis. And these are also things, I think one of the best techniques for reflexivity is within the team of researchers and people who are part of the ethics protocol, like talking about it. This person said this to me and I didn't know what to do with it. And can you like debrief or kind of unpack it as a team, as long as you're within those ethical parameters? I think that's where you get a really good kind of sober second thought, if you will, of, or like another perspective on, oh, this is maybe where they were coming from. I see why that's upsetting. And so I regularly have those discussions and I find them incredibly helpful. So working backwards a little bit, reflexivity, broad idea that we don't do research as robots, we need to reflect on ourselves, not saying we have to pretend we're robots or that we have no stake in what's happening, but being mindful that we're not overriding the participant views in the topic. Now, when you're writing memos, I find it important to write memos right after an interview, and I generally respond to things that make that interview different from others in as a broad overview. So I would write things that might not necessarily reflect in a transcript if you're using transcripts later on. So I've had some where this participant was angry. They came in with an axe to grind. I barely said a word and they started just, this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong. And this person just launched in. So that tells me that this research topic is really important for them. Or they feel strongly about this, or they felt betrayed when this happened, or you can kind of respond to like, wow, most people were pretty neutral, but this person was angry, or something along those lines. Like what kind of emotions were driving them? Did they feel embarrassed? Did they feel ashamed? Were they enthusiastic? You might want to note some of those things because it will give context to when you're rereading transcripts later on. You can also use memos to reflect on your own practice and to say, hey, I really stuffed up how I asked that question, or like, oh, they offered a lead here, but I didn't take it. I asked them something else, and I really should have maybe dug into that a little bit more detailed. So you can use it as an opportunity to reflect on your own practice as well as what the participant has said. They also don't have to be lengthy, and it's not psychoanalysis. It's just looking at, okay, what do I need to keep track of? So when I'm coming back to this later, I'm like, oh yeah, that was some of the context, or that was what was happening for me that day, or I talked to my colleague about this and I didn't understand that this was informing what was happening. So you can see them as notes that you make that you either include as data or you use them as prompts for yourself when you're returning to these data to do more formal analysis. Lots of software has different kind of gimmicky things. You can add a note here, a memo here, an annotation, or whatever they want to call them. Personally, I just generally keep a table in a Word document and put the date and, excuse me, maybe like if it's specific to a participant, maybe a participant identifier like P1, participant one, something like that. No connection directly to who the person is, but I'll have, June 25th, P1 questions about this topic. And I might say, the participant was slow to warm up, but once they got going, they really talked a lot. So either they were intimidated or shy, or maybe this was a sensitive topic, but they got there in the end. I want to remember how much they emphasized this point when I'm doing this analysis. I felt really comfortable doing this interview, and so I think I asked questions really effectively. I'm going to build on that next time. That's all it has to be. And so, um, and last point is don't write memos performatively. Make sure you write something that's useful for you. And I know sometimes you think like, oh my gosh, I'll never forget this person said this thing to me. And sometimes that is true, but more often than not, it's nice to have some of your reflections to look back, when if you're defending your thesis 18 months later, you might not remember all that fine grained detail. So it's nice to have those notes there to be like, yeah, that particular conversation really spurred my thinking about this or led me down that path and go from there. So go forward, write memos, be reflexive, think about your work, and use it as an opportunity to keep building the understanding that you're creating with your participants.